Okay. Good evening, everyone. A special welcome home, of course, to Gail, uh, and we're slowly getting the crowd back to Ashkelon, which is wonderful. Um, so, what we want to do this evening is we want to talk about one of the more, well, I don't know what word to use to describe it, mysterious, unusual um, stories in all of Tanakh, and it's the story of the affair of Yehuda and Tamar, um, and and out of this difficult story, which of course we're going to talk about in a minute, ends up becoming, we believe, one of the great acts of heroism in all of Jewish history. And out of this difficult situation, we we end up we end up with Mashiach, um, and that's going to be part of our discussion. Oh, oh, sorry, Rona. Okay.
Let me see if I can make this work.
Well, it'll be up sometime tomorrow morning. I'll bleed it, or I'll have it up. Okay. So let's take a look at the one verse that we're going to be using this evening. Okay. And it's the climax, if you will, of this difficult story. And before I read the verse, I should go back to the beginning, that Yehuda has left his brothers, and the verse says, Yarad, he descended from his brothers. So there's this sense that he has become less involved in the family. It's like in the next chapter, Yosef is going to be brought down, the same word, Laredit, to go down to Egypt. So Yehuda's having his own going down that's more spiritual, and like I said, sort of leaving the family a little bit. He marries a Canaanite woman, has two sons immediately, and they die, and they get married to Tamar. And Tamar is again a Canaanite woman, and after the two husbands have died, there's a third son that's at this point very young, Shelah, and he says, "Oh, when he grows up, you'll get to marry him," so that she has to wait years for this to happen, and then she can't stand the wait, and so she disguises herself as a prostitute, and Yehuda is enticed by her. They have relations. She disappears, but he left her with identifying items. And at this point, 3 months later, is where our story picks up. Her pregnancy has begun to show. And so she is still connected to the family. No one, to their knowledge, in the family has had relations with her. She has committed an early form of adultery. And under those circumstances, in the pre-Torah world, people were executed for that. So they're getting ready to execute her. And at that point, she produces these identifying items that Yehuda had left with her 3 months previously. And that's where our verse picks up the story. V'yaker Yehuda. Yehuda recognized the items. In the JPS translation that's on the page, Judah recognized them, the items. There was a patil, we're not sure exactly what that was, and there is a signet ring, there's a chotemet, So there's a couple of items, and he sees that they identify him. Oh, and he then announces, Tzadka mimeni, she is more righteous than I. Ki al kain lo natatia l'sheila, I didn't give her to my now adult third son, which I promised and I was supposed to do. I didn't allow that marriage to take place. Maybe he was afraid that there was something unlucky. She was what in halach is called a katlanit, a wife whose husbands tend to die. So maybe he was afraid, but we don't see that. He just didn't do it. V'lo Yosef od lidata. And then it says, and he was no longer intimate with her. In other words, even though they had this affair, and out of this affair she becomes pregnant, and in a couple of verses the two babies are born, and they become major players in Jewish history, as we'll come to in just a few minutes. Okay, so Rashi, on the spot, gives two interpretations of the fifth word in the verse. So if you look at the Hebrew for a second, V'yakir Yehuda recognized, Vayomer, and he states, Tzadka, she is righteous. Then comes the word mimeni. So Rashi immediately gives an interpretation, mimeni, from me, she is with child. Mimeni, from me, is this baby. This baby is mine. Okay? Our rabbis, on the other hand, gave a famous drasha. Explained this to mean a bat kol came forth from heaven. A divine voice came out at this moment. A divine voice comes out from heaven, and the voice coming from heaven is mimeni. It came from me. From me, God. God says, I arranged all of these events. I am the one who, put all of this together for my own purposes. We'll see what those purposes are in just a few minutes. From me and my agency have these things happen because she proved herself a modest woman, an anava. Anava in Hebrew, in the Jewish language, is a very profound word. We're told in Pirkei Avot that people should be anavim, people should be modest and humble, and she was. Whilst in her father's house, I have ordained that kings shall be descended from her, which means that when you get to the end of Sefer Bereshit, and the brachot are given by Yaakov Avinu, the blessing of kingship is given to Yehuda. These children from Tamar, from this seemingly illicit relationship, end up becoming the progenitors of the kings of the Jewish nation. David HaMelech is a direct descendant of them, Shlomo, etc. Okay, and this is a very powerful statement. So is it from me, Yehuda saying it, or is it from me, capital M, from God? Okay, Pshat is it's Yehuda, but the famous drasha is God was putting his seal of approval on what happened at this very moment. Okay, the Sforno, commenting on that exact same powerful phrase, Tzadka mimeni, she is more righteous than I. Even though she approached me under false pretenses, she disguised herself as a harlot, misrepresenting herself. She still acted more righteously than I did. Her deceit was practiced for a noble cause and appears to have been approved by God. Our sages have used this occurrence as the basis for the statement, a sin committed for noble cause is better than a good deed when it is not performed as such, but as something self-serving. We have a principle in Jewish law that's called an Avera Lishma, a sin performed for a noble purpose. And that kind of noble purpose, even though the act itself is a sin, nevertheless gets the person the reward as if it were indeed a mitzvah. And this is one of those occasions, according to the Sforno. Not everybody agrees. There's a lot of commentaries that say this is the famous case of Avera Lishma, someone who broke the law. Okay, I mean, I love the man of La Mancha. It's like that concept of marching into hell for a heavenly cause, right? So that's like this idea of Avera Lishma. Not everybody agrees. A lot of people think that what she did was not an Avera, because before the Torah was given, this was how Yibum works. Now, we have a mitzvah in the Torah of Yibum, that if a young man dies and his wife is childless, she has the mitzvah of marrying his next in line surviving brother. And we believe that before Matan Torah, Yibum, levirate marriage, could be performed with any close relative, which is why, and even after Matan Torah, there was an echo of this idea in the book of Ruth. Ruth is going to marry Boaz, but Boaz couldn't marry her because there was a closer relative, a Goel, who had Yibum. It's not the Torah's perfect ideal levirate marriage, but the woman should go to the nearest male relative if there are no brothers. So that's why Boaz has to negotiate with this cousin who is anonymous. We don't know his name, Ploni Almoni, to get permission to marry Ruth. So this idea of close relatives being able to marry the widow may have been, before the Torah, considered to be a mitzvah. So maybe it wasn't an Avera at all. However, in many rabbinic sources, like the Sforno, this concept of Avera Lishma, it takes the forefront. Okay. I think everybody else we're going to do tonight is relatively modern. Two of them are still alive. The first two we're going to see are still alive. And one is Rabbi Yaakov Meidan. And Rav Meidan is one of the Rosh Yeshivas at Yeshivat Har Etzion. Is a wonderful man. I actually served in the army with him. And he's a big Talmid Chacham and a wonderful person. And unlike many Israeli Rosh Yeshivas, he spent a lot of his efforts trying to explain Tanakh. Usually when you hear things from a Rosh Yeshiva, it's on Gemara or Halacha, but not Rav Meidan. Some of his most critical thinking is applied to issues in Tanakh. And this is one of the times. When we get to the end of it, everybody will be able to guess when he wrote this. But it applies to today, even though you'll see when he wrote it. This quality of Yehuda to overcome spiritual difficulties, to be a Baal Tshuva, this quality is also evident in the incident involving Tamar. It seems that Yehuda committed one major sin, not his fornication, not his relations with this woman of the night. That's not the problem. And not even his marriage earlier in the chapter to a Canaanite woman, even though we saw that both Avraham and Yitzchak were upset if their children should marry Canaanites, and Yaakov went ahead and did it. Yehuda went ahead and did it anyways, or even his marriage to a Canaanite in the first place. But that he left Tamar as a deserted wife and denied the necessity to establish a name for his deceased sons. he left her deserted. He didn't allow her to do Yibum, even this pre-Torah version of Yibum. That was his sin, not marrying a shiksa, if I can say it that way, and not going out to a woman of the night. Those weren't nice things, but they weren't major sins at this point in Jewish development. But leaving Tamar hanging for decades, that is a terrible sin. The whole point of the mitzvah of Yibum is mutual responsibility. It is the brother's obligation to establish the name of his deceased brother by giving up one of his own children. It's not really giving up, it's still his child, but the first child born, in the parenthesis, to be named after the deceased. The minhag, the halacha, is that the first baby born, is named for the departed brother. I mean, we're not going to go into mysticism here, but according to the mystics, that baby actually has the neshama, the soul of the deceased brother. That's pretty spooky. But I mean, if in Gilgul Neshamot, who believe in reincarnation, that this idea fits in very powerfully. I'm skeptical, but okay, let's leave it there. This is a difficult challenge. And indeed, initially Yehuda showed no concern and refrained from worrying about Tamar. Wow, how could he do that? He just left her in the lurch, saying in his heart, let her remain single until her hair turns gray. But in the end, he had a change of heart. When Yehuda declared, she is more righteous than I, he assumed responsibility for his actions and saved her from death, because they were going to execute her because they assumed that she had committed adultery, having relations with somebody not part of Yehuda's family. Therefore, he merited a special blessing. That public confession merited a special blessing. We find the very same thing in King David. The first to fulfill the verse, the scepter shall not depart from Yehuda. The blessing Yaakov gives to Yehuda is, once the scepter, the throne, the crown is in the family of Yehuda, it shall never depart from there. From then on, the kings of Judaism are from King David. But what was the real merit? A leader's ability to admit his mistake and accept full responsibility saved us in the days of King David from the plague. That when King David did an illegal census of the nation, and the result was a plague, King David got up and said, it's my fault. I sinned. And that's why this has befallen our nation. And then the Mageifa ended. And then at that moment, the plague stopped because of the admission of guilt of our king. Listen to the last sentence of this article by Rav Meidan. It's a longer article, but this is the end of it. May we succeed to bear the responsibility that lies before us, and in that way merit that God will save us from the current epidemic. Okay. Should I play the music from the end of Jeopardy? Bum, 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 bum. So when was this article written? It was written during the COVID epidemic. And he was talking about how government officials he specifically had the Minister of Health in mind, how certain government officials should bear responsibility and own up. Aren't we going through the same difficulty today? Aren't there members of our government who today can't speak the words, I'm sorry, I was wrong? I'd hate to think that this war is going to have to continue until some people sitting in our government stand up and accept responsibility. instead of saying, oh, it was the head of that service, it was the head of this, it was somebody else, it was somebody under me made a mistake. I mean, Rav Meidan's not saying it, but, I don't know, some of us are Americans here. We understand what Harry Truman said, the buck stops here. And we right now have a government that doesn't understand that and isn't willing as yet to accept responsibility. I think when all is said and done and a commission of inquiry comes up, like happened after the Yom Kippur War, I think responsibility is going to fall very heavily on some pretty famous members of the present government, leadership especially. And I just, when I read this, as I'm getting ready, I think, oh my God, here it is. We're going through this all over again. People get up at press conferences and they can't say the words, Chatasi, I sinned. I made a mistake. I was wrong. It's so sad. But what we have to learn from this and from our present situation, the greatness of Yehuda. Yehuda was the first person that we know of in history to get up publicly and say, it was me. I take responsibility. And for that, he becomes Mashiach. The Mashiach comes from Yehuda. And we're going to talk more about that idea in just a few minutes. We're going to come back to that. And Rav Ari Khan, who also, although he teaches many places, teaches at the OU, and he writes for a number of websites, but he also does some teaching at Har Etzion as well. And he's a very active and wonderful modern teacher. And he talks about this exact same issue. The Midrash understands that the relationship between Yehuda and Tamar is directly related to the relationship between Yehuda and his father, because this sin of Yehuda wasn't Yehuda's first sin. When did Yehuda sin before this? Listen, when Tamar says the words, do you recognize who owns this ring, this staff, and this coat? I'm not sure that the last word is coat, but okay, we'll use this translation. Yehuda hears the echo. He can hear in his mind the same words that he said to his father, to Yaakov Avinu, when he looked his father in the eye and shattered his world by saying, do you recognize this coat of many colors, which they had, of course, dipped in blood? Okay. Do you recognize whose coat this is? So here he's getting payback when Tamar says, do you recognize these items? Is it your son's coat? The effect on him is profound. It was like thunderstruck. Oh my God, my sin has rebounded on me. The effect on him is profound. It's earth-shaking. And Judah recognized Yakir, that same root, Yud Kaf Reish, Yakir recognizes and said, she is more righteous than I. I'm the sinner. With those words, the idea of Mashiach was created. That's a fascinating thing for Rabbi Khan to say. Rabbi Khan is intimating that if it hadn't been for this incident, the concept of Mashiach might not exist. It's hard to believe that because it's become such a central idea, the idea that a leader can really change the world for his people happened at this moment, began at this moment. Would there have been a Mashiach without this? I don't know. It's a fascinating idea of Rabbi Khan's. And I must be honest, I've never heard anyone else say this, that the idea is, what most Meforshim say, and I'm going to come back to this idea in a few minutes, about 10 minutes, what most commentaries say is, it was at this moment that Yehuda's family becomes the family of Mashiach. They don't say what Rabbi Khan says. It's at this moment that the whole concept of Mashiach was born. And from his union with Tamar, kings will emerge, David and the Mashiach. If one thing has seemed clear, now this is a fascinating idea, that he's not the only one who talks about this. There's a great three-volume set of books about the end of the book of Bereshit, the last third of the book, written by Thomas Mann. It was written in German, but I read it in high school in English, of course, and it was, Thomas Mann ended up winning the Pulitzer Prize in Literature. I'm saying the Nobel Prize in Literature. He was a German Jew, and this was considered his greatest work, and it's called Joseph and His Brothers, and it's like these stories at the end of the book are just amazing stories, and what Rabbi Kahn is saying about this is, if one thing has seemed clear throughout the last third of the book of Genesis, it is that Joseph will emerge as the archetypal leader. Least likely as a candidate for leadership is Yehuda. I mean, it's Joseph who gets kidnapped and stolen and becomes a slave and then becomes a leader in Egypt. It's Yehuda who sells him. So it looks like the best leader is going to be Yehuda. The worst is going to be, is going to be Joseph. The worst is going to be Yehuda. But that's not what Jewish history says. Who proposed selling Joseph, whom we next see separated from his brother. I mean, Yehuda looks like he has left the family. He lives amongst the Canaanites, intermarries with them, losing 2 sons because of a sin, and then having sexual relations with a woman he takes to be a prostitute. I mean, if you stopped the film or the storyline at that moment, you would say, the end of this book, Joseph is going to reign supreme, and Yehuda, he's going to be an afterthought. He's going to be the goat, right? No, but that's not what happens, because at this moment, this chapter begins because of a sin and having sexual relations with a woman. This chapter begins with, at that time, Yehuda went down, Yerad went down from amongst his brethren. This is to indicate Judah's moral decline. At this point, he may have no doubt who will lead and who will follow, yet history turned out otherwise. Joseph's descendants disappeared from history after the Assyrian conquest in 722 BCE. The 10 northern tribes, which were run by the tribe of Ephraim, which was the son of Yosef, they're gone. I mean, we do have their gene pool still living amongst us. We didn't lose all of them, but in terms of leadership, they're gone. While Judah's descendants became and remain the kings. The tribe of Judah survived the Babylonian conquest, and it is his name that we bear as a people. We are Yehudim, descendants of Yehuda. That's who we are. Jews are the descendants of Yehuda. We are not Josephites, whatever the word would be, if Joseph won this competition. And now he concludes, leaders make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but with leaders, everybody knows. This is an occupational hazard of the role. This is a great line. Managers follow the rules, but leaders find themselves in situations for which there are no rules. Managers follow the rules. Leaders make up new rules. And when you do that, but leaders are also human, and their mistakes often have nothing to do with leadership and everything to do with human weakness and temptation, just like Yehuda. What matters is that you repent. What matters is you admit your mistakes. You do tshuva. Saul and David both sinned. Both are reprimanded by a prophet, and both use the word chatati, I sinned. However, but their fates were radically different. Saul lost his throne. David did not. Why? The reason was that David confessed immediately. Saul prevaricated before admitting his sin. He said, the people made me steal those goats and not kill Agag, king of Amalek. It wasn't my fault. And then when pressed, he says, okay, you're right, it was my fault. That's a loser. But David HaMelech, Yehuda, when confronted with their mistake, immediately, chatati, aviti, pashati, I was wrong. I made a mistake. I just boldened the last line. A leader is one who, though they may stumble and fall, arises more honest, humble, and courageous than they were before. Like to see that in the present government. But it's a beautiful, beautiful idea. We believe that tshuva, repentance, the whole process, which is why it's such a big chunk out of our year, an entire month of Elul, then the first 10 days of Tishrei. I mean, that's, almost a fifth of our year is dedicated to this idea of doing tshuva, because it's so important for making us better people. If you wouldn't mind, turn to the back page, and this is, I said, mostly relatively modern. Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch died in 1880, so he's not as modern as these other people, but he makes an important point. I can't. I wish I had the power to take this idea and just express it in a way that everyone would get it. And I don't know why people have so much trouble understanding this very simple point that Rev Hirsch made 150 years ago. The Torah never presents our great men as being perfect. Baruch Hashem, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch never read any of the modern, should I say the name, art scroll biographies of Gedolim, where they can't do anything wrong. I mean, they were from 3 years old. They said a bracha, when they were drinking their mother's milk. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's a problem because when these publishing houses write up our Torah giants and our spiritual leaders as being so perfect, it's impossible for us to identify with them. It's impossible for us to even try to emulate them. They just, they set a bar that is ridiculously impossible to reach. And it's not true. We all know, periodically, a biography comes out and tells the truth, and then it gets banned. Whether it was the biography of Yaakov Kamenetsky Zal, or the biography of the Nitziv, Natali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, and when they came out and told the truth, those books were taken off the market because we can't have the Nitziv ever making a mistake. I don't get it. But okay, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch got it right. The Torah never hides from us the faults, errors, and weaknesses of our great men. By that, it gives the stamp of veracity to what it relates. If everything's perfect, it's a fairy tale. It's not true. But the Torah rings true because people make mistakes. people act like people. But in truth, by the knowledge which is given us of their faults and weaknesses, our great men are in no ways made lesser, but actually greater and more instructive. When we see that they can correct this, never making a mistake, that's not greatness, that's a fairy tale. If they stood before us as the purest models of perfection, we should attribute them as having a different nature, which has been denied to us. They wouldn't be human. We wouldn't be a errare humanum est. It says, we say in Latin, to err is human, but it's also in Mishle. Ein ish lo yachta. There's no man that doesn't sin. Ein adam. Sorry. It will never be a task to whitewash the spiritual and moral heroes of our past. Well, there's a whole publishing effort being done to do that, to appear as apologists for them. Truth is the seal of our Torah, and truthfulness is the principle of all its true and great commentators and teachers. I mean, if the Torah can tell us that Yehuda sinned or Yosef sinned, why can't some rabbi sin? I don't get it. I just have so much difficulty with this. Just before we go away from this particular topic, I just want to quote something from Nechama Leibovich. Nechama Leibovich, which I should have put on the page, and I don't know, I messed up. Okay, made a fascinating comment. We have this chapter that says Yehuda went down from his brothers, and then all of these stories take place. The next chapter says Yosef was brought down to Egypt. So we're clearly being told that we're supposed to compare these two stories. So this is what Nechama Leibovich said. As such, we can understand that ultimately from these two episodes emerged the two redeemers of Israel. Mashiach ben Yosef, there's a tradition in the Gemara, and it appears 2 or 3 times in the Bavli, that there'll be Mashiach from the family of Yosef, and of course the Mashiach ben David, who we call Mashiach. There is a tradition amongst Jewish thinkers that there will be 2 stages to the messianic redemption, involving the advent of 2 messianic figures, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben Yosef is described as a warrior who will effect the national reunification of the Jewish people prior to the arrival of Mashiach ben David, who will lead us spiritually. And this is very powerful. Yosef is not to be ignored. Yosef was Yosef a tzaddik, but a tzaddik isn't always what we need. What we need is someone who's real, who makes mistakes and corrects them. And that's what that's why all of us have pencils with erasers on the end. Okay. Okay, what time is it? Okay, I hope I left myself enough time. The Rabbi Soloveitchik, is going to look at this entire story from a different vantage point. Till now, we've been talking primarily about Yehuda and secondarily about Yosef and their greatness and how they are going to lead the Jewish people throughout much of our time. Much of Jewish history is a competition between Yosef and his descendant Yoshua, and then the kings in the northern kingdom. Those are all descendants of Yosef. And then the other side is Yehuda, David, Shlomo. Later, you're going to see, the Nesiim, the heads of the Jewish community in Tanaitic Israel. The Anshe Knesset Agadola is led by people from the tribe of Yehuda, and eventually the exilarchs, the leaders of the Jewish community in Bavel, in Babylonia, trace their lineage directly back, the reincarnation of the kingship of David in Mashiach. So that's what we've been talking about. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, there's another ingredient. When you have a child, there are two partners working here. And he's going to take a look at it from the other side. And he says, the giving of the Torah initiated the messianic process of redeeming the world from its crudity and profanity. It will be consummated in the messianic era when Matan Torah is bound up with Mashiach. In other words, we have the Torah, but the Torah is not going to be the perfect leadership vehicle for our people until the messianic period. Okay. Matan Torah is bound up with Mashiach, the Messiah, who will possess the heroism of whom? Of his grandmothers. That it is not only the story of DNA coming from Yehuda, there's also a story of DNA coming from some other women whom the Almighty found in the non-Jewish world. Mashiach comes from Yehuda on one side and from non-Jewish women on the other side. They represented the heroism of loneliness, Tamar, the heroism of universal commitment, and the heroism of faith and waiting. The great vision of a redeemed world would have been impossible had Lot's daughters been destroyed in Sodom. Where is the first seed of Mashiach found? In the older daughter of Lot, because that's who Ruth comes from. Unbelievable, right? Why else would the Torah record such an ugly event? It is not a story of incest. It is the story of Mashiach, because out of that relationship comes Ruth and comes David, comes Mashiach. The personality of the King Messiah is not monotonic. I was thinking whether I should leave that line in, but I mean, it's not like one color. It's not like it's not monotonic. Most of us don't talk like the Rev. Okay, God weaves the personality of the Messiah with vast amounts of multicolored threads, just like Joseph's multicolored Technicolor shirt. Everything good and noble in man must be passed on to the Mashiach. Mashiach has to have everything that is good and noble in man, in humanity, in our race. He will have the capacity for gevura, bravery and strength, and chesed, kindness and warmth. He will be a hero with unlimited power who will defend justice. He will also be a man of unlimited loving kindness, humble and simple. All these capabilities and talents will merge in beautiful harmony in the King Messiah. If there is something fine in the non-Jewish families of the earth, it too will be passed into and onto the Mashiach. Rabbi Eliezer stated, what is meant by the verse, and in you shall the families of the earth be blessed? Hashem said to Avram, I have two goodly shoots to engraft onto you. I have two shoots I'm going to graft. I'm going to make them part of your family. Ruth, the Moabitess, and Naamah, the Ammonite. That's the daughter of Lot. Ruth and her great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. Lot's daughter had something beautiful contribute to the personality of the Mashiach. She was the great-great-grandmother of Ruth. The Messiah will be her descendant. The Mashiach has another grandmother from the Gentile world, Tamar. Isn't it fascinating that the women who contribute the DNA that we know of into the Mashiach are non-Jewish women? Wonderful women, but non-Jewish women. She was the great-great-grandmother of Boaz, and consequently of David and of the Mashiach. The Torah tells us, it came to pass at that time that Yehuda went down from his brethren. That's the beginning of this parsha, the beginning of this parak, when Yehuda looks like he's lost, looks like he's leaving the fold. The Midrash says that at that time means that everyone was busy. Yaakov was busy mourning for Yosef. Yosef was busy mourning his fate. Reuven was busy mourning his lost opportunity when he thought he was going to save Yosef. Yehuda was busy choosing a wife, and God was busy creating the light of the King Mashiach. Everybody was busy at that time, and it was all going to culminate in the Mashiach. In other words, Yehuda set in motion a process leading to his marriage to Tamar, which resulted in the inspired personality of the Mashiach. Tamar was a heroic woman, a great woman. We've been looking at this all this time from the point of view of Yehuda. But the Rav came around and said, wait a minute, don't forget Tamar. What could Tamar do that others could not? She could wait. She possessed the heroic ability to wait without end. Yehuda told Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house until Shalom, my son, has grown up. All her friends married. People treated her with ridicule and contempt. Shalah himself got married. Yehuda had forgotten her, and yet she waited and continued waiting. Wasn't she the incarnation of Knesset Yisrael? Isn't she representing what the Jewish people have been doing for thousands of years, waiting and crying and waiting some more, which has waited for her beloved thousands of years. Waiting for her beloved is a reference to Shir HaShirim. Shir HaShirim is about the Jewish nation waiting for God. Did not Tamar personify the greatest of all heroic action? To wait while the waiting arouses laughter and derision. Now, the Rav felt that way about being Jewish. He felt many times that he had friends in the intellectual world. Some were priests and doctors of philosophy, and many of them ridiculed him, both in Germany and later in Boston, for having faith in Judaism when clearly Judaism had been discarded from history. Until Hakamat Medina. But okay. The Messiah has yet another grandmother who came to us from the Gentile world, Ruth. She too was heroic. Boaz acknowledged the great courage of this pagan girl in casting her lot with the people she did not know. When we read these words, we willy-nilly, when I read these words, I think of the Rav saying, willy-nilly, okay. We willy-nilly think of the question asked of any applicant for Gerut. What do you say? Someone's coming to, I sat, Baruch Hashem, probably a couple of dozen times on Batei Din for Gerut. And the first question is, what prompts you to convert? Do you not know that the Jews are persecuted and oppressed, despised and harassed? Only a hero joins our strange and lonely people. Ruth came from a pagan background with unlimited pleasure. Where unlimited pleasure was an element in their worship. And she joined a religion that demands discipline over the biological call for gratification. We're supposed to always be in control. To outsiders, Judaism is a difficult religion. The mere fact that the halacha interferes with every phase of human life makes the commitment seem almost superhuman. Gerut is a heroic action at the level of observance and of one's relationship with the non-Jewish world. No wonder the Talmud says that the Jews, upon responding, we shall do, na'aseh v'nishma, were called gibori koach, heroes. When you agree to do something that the rest of the world says is crazy, That makes you a hero. The Mashiach must be endowed with those heroic qualities, for he is coming to change the status quo. He's going to totally do a makeover on the entire world, to revolutionize concepts, to transform our outlook on life. He will defy evil, oppose ruthlessness, challenge injustice, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the land with the shavet, the rod of his mouth. He's not going to beat people up till they listen to him. He's going to beat them with the rod of his mouth, his lips, his tongue, his expressions. He's going to convince people of what is right. He's going to convince people to be kind, to be ethical, to be moral. And with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. He's not going to kill people. He's going to kill the wickedness in people. Messianism minus heroism is meaningless. The proof that the Torah is not spouting hollow affirmation or spreading Pollyannish illusions is the women who fought back and overcame the finality of death. Torah is not a fairy tale. It's not about happy endings. It's about hard work. And these women represent that effort. This is the force in humans that has the ability to give the final victory to life. When you look through most of Chazal, when we look at our story, most people really talk about Yehuda, and he deserves it. And we are Yehudim, and everything we said in the first half of the share is true, that this ability to admit you were wrong, to be the Baal Tshuva, even a tzaddik gamor, even someone who's never sinned can't stand in the same place where a Baal Tshuva stands. All of that is wonderful. But we wouldn't have the story if it wasn't for these gerim, these giarot, these wonderful women who decided to throw their lot in with the Jewish people. And it's out of that heroism, together with the anivut, with the humility and the righteousness and the Baal Tshuva nature of the Yehuda side, comes the great power and strength and just stick-to-itiveness of these women. It's somehow easy for many rabbis to read the story and just talk about Yehuda and ignore Tamar. But thank God the Rav couldn't do that. So as much as we had to say about Yehuda, we have to say equally as much about Tamar. And we sit here admiring the greatness of these people, and also hopefully sitting here awaiting the coming soon of their precious offspring. We can really use it right now. Thank you all for joining this evening. For those that aren't here, let them know the tape will be up tomorrow. And Gail, welcome home. It's great to see you. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.